Hello, just a quick note here about the decision making that's part of the cartographic process of making maps from low altitude aerial images from balloons and kites, where the precision is not entirely always consistent, and sometimes you have imagery that's not straight down of adjacent areas where you also want to include on your map. So we have a map here that's in progress, and you can see lots of edges from different images. And we have some base data from Google that we're using in overlay to rectify the new imagery. And we're going to go dive into this neighborhood over here. And part of the reason I wanted to call out and make a note about this is that here on the satellite image we see that this really high building is also not at a vertical angle, even in satellite, because it's such a tall building. And the western and northern sides of this building are visible, while the southern and eastern sides aren't visible, and it's even obscuring the sidewalk on the street here. So we have our new map that we've been working on. And there's two images here that I was about to add to the project, and I just wanted to show that what it's like here. So we have another image, another angle on this building, and from our flight. And while this is kind of a crazy angle on this building, here we are with data for this other part of the block, these other buildings over here, and I think it's going to be useful to add it to the map. And I also have one other image for the other side of the building. So it's basically you treat each image one at a time, and just kind of the person who's making the map is actually just going to make the final judgment on what to add and how to add it, and when to just say, okay, that's enough. And I always try to and use all the data that I have. If I have data that's off to an adjacent area of the map, but it's not at a perfect angle, I like to include it usually because I think it's nice to have as much as possible on the map. So just to show you really fast, I'm looking at this image and overlay here, and I'm going to toggle the transparency to see the existing map below, and just kind of jump right into distort. And what I'm going to do is just look at the ground level and not the building itself. I'm going to ignore the building, and I'm just kind of looking at features on the ground, such as the edge of the lake, the park, and so on. So people have different stylistic preferences with how to distort imagery. I like to kind of move about radially around all the corners and really take my time. I'm going to do this a little fast here for this demonstration, but I usually take plenty of time to get comfortable and happy with the way that the overlay is happening. And even though this is oblique up here in this part of the block, I can identify certain features with the base map if I think about where the ground is. For example, there is this back porch on this building, and the sidewalk of the building, and the edge of the adjacent building, and I can see it all in the vertical imagery from Google. So if I think about where the ground level is on that image, I can sufficiently place it. And I'm just going to take that down a tiny bit. This corner needs to move. So it's close enough, and I'm trying to move quickly here. I'll transform it, and I can, at this point, I can do a few things, like I can clip out the area that is redundant and already on the map itself. So now we're just dealing with a smaller image of new data, and the overlapping area is not, there's not as much overlap, and it's a smaller image that I'm now trying to fit, and there's kind of less things to focus on. So then if I really want to, I can jump into the warp tool and really try to place everything sufficiently. And this is how I prefer to do it if I have time and everything. But so once I finalize that one, I would merge the two layers together, and that part of the block would be in our map. And now I just want to jump to this other side, and this one's even more oblique. Just to show it, just to talk about how I would go about doing this. First, it needs to be reduced in size, but the critical thing is to look at this building here that's a few stories high and not focus on the roof. It's very tempting to focus on the roof because it's geometric, and in the base data we see the roof very easily. But if you think about where the ground level is, and you try to stick to using features like the sidewalk and the driveways and the bottom of where the electric poles and telephone poles are, and the street lines and the base of trees and trails and things like that on the ground, you have much more success. And this just basically how you have to do it. It's the only way to union this different data together. So we would go through a distort on this one as well, and then each one of the two images I would clip away part of the building here, because I want the stuff that's on the ground over here then low to the ground, and this very drastic distortion of this part of the building, this upper part, I'm going to remove, because I want the part of the base map to show back there, because the building ends right here, and I don't want it to obscure too much of the base map, because the idea is that this layer sits there and you can see the base map behind it and kind of know what you're seeing, and so I don't want to overly obscure what we're looking at. And now we see the final map in the Public Laboratory Archive, and I'm going to open up the viewer here in full screen, and we'll dive back down to that neighborhood really quickly and look to see how I chose to deal with those two different angles on that building. So what you can see here is that there's a hard line here. It's impossible to blend these two different angles. So what I chose to do was to place as much as possible of the part of the imagery where I had these other features, these other buildings, place that stuff, and then cut away the excess of the wild distortion on the tall building. So you can see the rest of the base map up here, and kind of be able to toggle the layer on and off and kind of know what you're dealing with. And I think this is nice. We can show what's going on with these other properties here instead of obscuring half of the street like it would have been if we just took one image on the tall building.